Hi, you're listening to the Fresh Start podcast, and this is episode number 9. Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. I'm Marcia, and I'm here with
Stacy.
Hey Stacy. You guys can't see Stacy, but
Oh no.
maybe you can. Maybe you can see her. If you go to our YouTube channel, you can see her, but she has the most lovely red lipstick on today. She was trying to take it off. She was like, "It's too red." No, I kept looking at it's beautiful on your
Oh,
with your
thank you.
skin tone and your earrings. Well, she's looking, y'all need to go to YouTube. You need to see her. She looks lovely. Don't look at me because I've been cleaning house all day and I don't have
Don't
any
listen
makeup
to
on.
her. Marsha's rocking the new hair. Your hair looks phenomenal. You've been
Well,
working so hard to transition to gray, and it's
yeah.
lovely.
We were talking about last week about aging with Corinne Almond, and it was such a great topic. If you guys haven't listened to that, I've been thinking about a lot of what she said and talking to different people about the aging process. And one of the things that I did was I let all my gray hair grow out. It did take about 18 months. It was a process, but I'm digging it. I'm digging it. What are you still letting your grays grow out?
Yeah. Yeah, they're still growing.
Yeah, I don't even see them. See,
Oh, well, it's because I have my hair up. You could definitely see more. When you see me in a couple weeks, you'll be able to witness the silver tinsel.
okay. Yeah, the tinsel. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I'm excited. We're going to get to see each other at a little retreat in a couple of weeks, and it always does my heart good to spend some face-to-face time with you. So I'm excited about that. And this week we have a really interesting guest. Her name is Jodi Rose Gonzalez, and she is a visual artist, art therapist, author, and mindfulness coach who inspires her students through teachings intended to spread more hope and healing around the world. Lord knows we all need
Y'all
healing
need
in this world. She is recognized as a top artist by Marquis Who's in America and a global impact artist by the International Association of Top Professionals. Jodi has authored 2 Amazon #1 new releases, including The Doodles Code and Drawn to Yoga. She is featured in an international bestseller called 50 Fearless Leaders, and she's the host of the irose podcast. She helps busy creative people who are intentional about personal growth using art-based mindfulness, a unique method that helps people develop insight and self-awareness, and manage anxiety and stress all in one simple practice. So I'm telling you, y'all need to stay tuned for this interview. She really is inspiring and we loved it. And I know you guys will too. So y'all stick around and get ready here for our interview with Jodi Rose Gonzalez.
Welcome back to the Fresh Start podcast. This is Stacy Wynn, and I am here with the hostess with the mostest.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. That's me. No. Hey, everybody. It's Marcia. And we are here today with a really special guest. We have Jodi Rose Gonzalez here, and we are thrilled to have you. So welcome, Jodi.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, Stacy and Marcia. It's wonderful to meet you, and hello to your audience.
Yeah,
Well,
I thought this is going to be a really interesting. I'm a singer-songwriter. I'm a creative, so this is a lot of your work really touches me personally, and I can't wait to dive into it. But before we do, would you just sort of help our listeners put you in space and time and just kind of tell us like where you live, what you're doing now, what your life is like? Yeah, just introduce yourself a little bit.
Sure. Well, my name is Jodi, and I am a visual artist, an art therapist, and yoga teacher and mindfulness coach based out of Northeast Wisconsin in a beautiful community called Door County. We're about 5 hours north of Chicago. I am a fifth generation homesteader, just as a fun fact. And
Wow.
my work is very much informed by nature. So, whether or not people will see the video version of this, you'll see behind me, I have this figurative piece using objects found in nature. So, my work depicts the narrative, my visual artwork depicts the narrative of the hero's journey. And within the body of artwork, there's a central character named Timberella. So I have made 6 versions of her. I have the 7th over on the side of my studio where you can't see. And I'm passionate about sharing the theme of the hero's journey. It certainly arrives as a metaphor in my life, but I think it's a really interesting entry point for people for discussion about personal discovery and personal growth. I think it's easier to talk about the artwork and talk about the hero's journey and the things that inform that, the things that happen to us in our lives, to talk about it externally through the artwork or through the character like I said, as an entry point, and then people reflect on that in their own lives. So, I do, as an art therapist, have a clinical practice, and then I have a non-clinical practice. And on the non-clinical side, that's where I really teach creativity and mindfulness and how that informs our journey through life.
That's fascinating. And I did not pick up in the sleuthing that I did that you were a homesteader. I'm totally missed out on that. So fifth generation, like that's pretty significant.
It's really special. I mean, we're not that hardcore. We're not like survivalist homesteaders, but we have a huge garden and chickens, and we very much live off the land. I am the 5th generation to live on this property, and so that feels really, really special to be a steward of our land. And to just have that sense of history here. It very much informs my life's work, both from a community-based perspective, and as well as just the connection to place and how I express that through my artwork and use of materials. So, yeah, it's fun. It's hard. It's really hard work. So I had lived away for a while. I lived in Tucson, Arizona for about 12 years and then came back, and my husband and I jumped into managing the property, taking it over from my parents. And I've never worked harder in my life.
I
But
bet.
it's deeply satisfying, and he loves the gardening aspect, and I prefer to do anything with my chainsaws. So
Oh,
it's nice
A
that we can
chainsaw
divide and
girl.
conquer. Yes, I have a small one and a large one. They're called Porgy and Bess, and they're battery powered. I have multiple batteries, but I just figure, as opposed to like using the fossil fuel all the time, if I don't need to be out there more than the time's worth of a few batteries. Like if my chainsaw batteries are dead, so are mine. It's time to move on.
Well, I'm very familiar with Door County.
Oh,
My
cool.
aunt lived in Wisconsin. We went up there a lot, and it's a beautiful area. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, it's a bucolic arts destination known as the Cape Cod of the Midwest for listeners who are
Yeah,
trying to sort of envision what it's like. So there's just a wonderful community here and a very strong arts community as well.
that's awesome. I was reading a little bit about your story, and it reminded me of another guest that we had on recently, James Casto, and he was talking about how he had started on this path, a successful career, was doing really well on the outside, but on the inside, he knew he was doing great in the business world. But he's a singer-songwriter, he's a creative, and he was just dying inside. And he knew that something needed to change for him. And on September 11th, when the 911, when the everything hit, he was in his office and he was like, I've got to do something. I've got to
Um,
change. I'm dying here. So on the outside, he looked so successful. And I saw in your story that you kind of went through that very same thing. And was that sort of a catalyst for you to really dive into the work that you're doing now?
Absolutely. I think that in my life, I've been on several heroes' journeys.
Mhm.
And they parallel each other. They start at different times. And It was approximately 2004, 2005. I realized I was wearing the artist identity. I looked so put together on the outside, but on the inside, I was a mess. Like the inner outer worlds were not in alignment. And so I started on my quest to have that be more in alignment. And for me, that looked like starting graduate school for art therapy, and really stripping away the whole like I am an artist. Like I was so um what would be the word? Defended might be the right word. Like that was such an armor that I wore
Mhm.
that I would go on dates and bring my portfolio. I could talk about my work, but I couldn't talk about myself. Like I really didn't know
Oh.
who I was, even though I had all these accolades and that I was well known regionally for my artwork. I just really lacked confidence, and I was younger, 20, 25 years younger. I just didn't know myself. And so I realized as I was starting to reach some burnout in my work at that time, that operating like that was just not sustainable, and that I
Mhm.
just was not happy. And so that period of time when I stopped creating art for a living and started learning how to use creativity to live a better life informs the journey in my main body of work called Girl in the Woods, which is that's the broader piece that is about the hero's journey. And so when the girl in the body of work, there's a great storm and she falls from her nest and she finds herself on the forest floor in this unfamiliar territory. And how does she's fragile and alone, and she doesn't have the resources to get home. And so within this narrative, she starts wandering the forest floor, interacting with different forest creatures who impart their wisdom teachings. And so I make versions of the girl at various stages of her life or of her journey, and I make the forest creatures as well. That fall from the nest is symbolic of anything in life that leaves us feeling lost or without direction. It's the what happens, it's the moment of redirection. So whether it was, and I didn't write his name down, realizing on 9/11, like,
Mhm.
that he wasn't in alignment with
Mhm.
what he wanted to do or be in life. For me as well, like I just had this sort of wake up that I needed to stop kind of faking it till I make it
Mhm.
as a successful person,
Yeah.
and to really start to learn to live more from the inside out. Um, but for some people, it's a medical diagnosis.
Mm.
For others, it is the loss of a relationship or a breakup. It's a career transition. It's retirement. I mean, there are so many things that inform that beginning step within the journey. But that wake up that like, gosh, my inner world and outer world are not aligned.
Mhm.
There are other things too that informed that this sort of came together in that time period, in which I realized like I just have to let it all go.
Yeah.
Just have to let it all go and take a step in a new direction. Um, and so that was the start, truly, of what I offer today, 15
Yeah.
years later.
That's
No,
brave.
more than that, almost 20. We don't want to say
Ah. Yeah.
Yeah, that fall from the tree, like I had one of those moments in my life, and how I described it was feeling like I had put on a facade, and to the point that I really was the facade. I felt like, how do I even get out of that and get back to who I really am?
Yeah.
That was the kind of the process and how I described it. And you talk a little bit about some of the steps that we can take to do that,
Hmm.
to listen more to that internal voice to guide us through that process. And I
Yeah.
wonder if you'd share some of that.
Sure. Well, just sort of taking from my own journey, the what happened, because it was actually a pretty great and unique journey. I think it's like the yoga, like Old West version of Eat, Pray, Love. Um,
Yeah.
like, so I like left everything behind here in Door County and moved to Middle Tennessee and like finished up my degree in art therapy, and landed at Kripalu ultimately. I mean, I had this adventure in Middle Tennessee where we developed an economic development project in this community using art, and developing like an arts district within this rural
Where
town.
was that? I'm in
Yeah,
I'm in Nashville.
Okay, that it was in Perry County, which
Oh,
is
okay.
between Memphis and Nashville. And so
Okay.
this was in 2008, at the time, or 2009. And so I found myself in this community doing the community development work. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit here, but it was like that was the step in like embracing art as healing, embracing art for community building, and really starting to dive a little deeper into the therapeutic aspects of creativity, as I was completing my master's degree in art therapy. And like from there, I ended up at Kripalu, which is the North America's largest yoga retreat facility, and really started diving deep into yoga philosophy. So I stayed there for 4 months doing a selfless work program. And so I really there started learning a lot about the mind-body connection and Eastern philosophical traditions,
Yeah.
um, alongside what I knew about like neuroscience and Western science. And so that started my own inquiry and my own take on mindfulness. And in 2014, I had a medical crisis. So this was sort of my second step, my second hero's journey, because I had, as an art therapist, sort of wandered away from my own practice. And it was at that point that I started pulling on all of my tools to deal with the anxiety of pending procedures and some of the identity questions that I had surrounding loss, really, with related to that medical issue. And that informs art-based mindfulness as I teach it today. So this is sort of my long-winded way of, Stacey, I forget
yeah.
what your question was
Well, just,
initially, but
navigating that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. So it's like I really drew from my tools and life experiences to put together something that is evidence-based. It's based in science. It's got these Eastern traditions. It was tested first in my life, and then I shared it with other people. And so I think that context is really important that people understand as I share these resources. It's like that they really come from some deep-rooted traditions and a lot of evidence-based practices. So, when we talk about how can people lean in these times of challenges, what resources and tools, I really like to simplify it into three things, which is calm the body, to quiet the mind so that you can connect with your inner wisdom. And so, quieting the body means like learning to manage your nervous system, calling up rest and digest. And you can activate creativity. You can use creativity to do just that. There's a lot of science behind this. For example, that out of Drexel University, that doing a creative act for 45 minutes can lower the production of the stress hormone cortisol. It can also lower the heart and breath rate, which results in a feeling of calmness. That can even result in brainwave patterns similar to what monks demonstrate in meditation. And
Wow.
so, without even worrying what you're expressing, what you're making, if you're ever going to get done, you can get yourself into processes that will calm the body. And then again, there's the science that shows that when you do that, when you bring up the body's rest and digest, it quiets the mind. Like by quieting the mind, I mean like bringing you into more clarity and focus, silencing the frenetic, noisy mind chatter. And then once you experience that, then you can start to tap into like that quieter, more intentional inner voice. And we can use art making as an expression of that voice. So what I love about art-based mindfulness is that we can use practices that calm us. And so that might be something rhythmic, like knitting or crocheting or strumming a guitar.
Mm-hmm.
We can or use things that use both sides of the body. So whether that's painting with both hands, again, knitting, not that I'm a fan of knitting, it just is a really good example that's accessible for
Yeah.
people as I talk about it. All these things like call up the rest and digest. Then we can do art prompts around specific topics and recognize that the images that come out come from a part of the mind that is more intuitive and symbolic. And it holds information that either hasn't worked our way up to our front brain, where we can easily shoot it down as a solution, or, we might overanalyze or think, well, this is too simplistic, or we push that aside. Again, that voice from within is quieter. It's not as loud as the mind chatter. So if we can, do these calming, quiet practices that allow us, and I use guided imagery a lot, allow us to connect with sort of these pictures or senses, things that are more internal, then we can move those images out and work with them and tap them as a different source of information. Questions on that? That's sort of a lot.
Yeah.
That's really broad. I hope did that make sense? Like,
It
Yeah.
totally does. Yeah. And so is that an example of what I got from your mail list today, which was the podcast
Mhm.
about time and visualizing time. It was very fascinating. So I think about time. I use the Enneagram a lot, and there's an
Okay.
orientation to time with the Enneagram, which has fascinated me. So when I listened to that podcast, I was just really intrigued by allowing myself to visualize how I experience time. So is that an example of guided imagery?
yes and no. So that's an example of like an art prompt that we can use to develop self-awareness. And like, so for me, the self-awareness when I was exploring this idea of time as a person was like, I'm not very nice to her. I am very demanding. I expect way too much. She never gives enough, and like I realized I wanted to shift that. When I say guided imagery, it's more like just calming the body, centering practices, breathing techniques. And then for one that I really love to do is called Fountain of Healing, and then guiding people through interacting with a fountain and that offers a message, and then making art around that. So it is like the art prompts in the podcast, like time, it is somewhat guided imagery, but I think as I brought up the example before, and this is a beautiful part of art-based mindfulness, we can use the guided imagery to calm the body. Again, like grounding, bringing yourself into the senses, noticing the tactile quality of the chair that you sit on, even bringing in the senses further by lighting a candle or having soft music, like just inviting all of the senses to come into play. So we're really getting into the body, and then offering ideas for the imagery through the art prompt, which develop then self-awareness. So you can do both in the same practice, which, from the calming aspect, that's the side of creativity where we're managing stress and anxiety, right? And then the self-awareness piece, like exploring becoming more self-aware of your relationship to time and how to shift that, that's the self-awareness and personal development piece. Like I said, it's beautiful that you can do both in one practice. I love that about art-based mindfulness.
And these are the kind of practices that you teach in your art therapy classes?
Mhm. Yep. And I like to distinguish because art therapy is a distinct mental health profession that requires credentialing and licensure in different states. So there is like a national overarching organization with the code of ethics and all that. So I want to acknowledge that. And I do have a clinical practice where I work with psychotherapists and we have case managers and we work from a team perspective. And in that setting, we're working with very specific, like mental health diagnoses. And I have a very specific goal that we're trying to achieve within a person's service plan. So when I teach art-based mindfulness, It's a more general application that uses this basic principle of calm the body, to quiet the mind, to tap into the inner wisdom.
Mm.
And we use creativity to do so, like either from what we call the bottom up, that's the low back brain, which is like your nervous system calling up the rest and digest. Or the top down, top being like your front brain, that's your discerning, executive functioning, list completing, task completing part of your mind. That's also where self-awareness resides. So I teach people like how to use their creativity from the top down or the bottom up. And so the guided imagery, the art prompts, the meditations, those are all within my art-based mindfulness offerings.
Mm.
So that's the first step for people would be to listen to the podcast. Within the podcast, I talk about the irose Society, which is a weekly art prompt with affirmations, just so people can start to get their toes in the water of what this is all about. The podcast offers not just the art prompt as you experienced, Stacy, but usually also like a case study so that people can start to take these examples that we're talking about and realize how it shows up in people's lives, and how they, work the art prompts into their lives. And also it shows how you can use any materials. I use examples in the podcast of people using nature as a medium or responding in movement or not just painting and drawing. So when we talk about use of creativity, we're being very broad and how we talk about that.
Could it be
So,
gardening?
absolutely,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Flower petal mandalas are one of my favorite activities. So, but absolutely gardening, cooking, there are woodworking, there are just so many ways that when people start to understand this basic framework of art-based mindfulness, it's
Hmm.
like all of a sudden there's permission to put more time into it because we realize like, wow, this really is genuine self-care, especially when you start thinking about how the physical body is involved, how that focuses the mind. Like, we start to realize, like, these are legit practices for self-care. And so, yeah. So, are you a gardener, Marcia?
No.
Oh, well, so what brings up that question? So, I was thinking flower gardens,
Yeah.
maybe
Well,
everything
I'm a
vegetables.
I'm a gardener in my heart. I really I want to be a gardener. And I will say that the few times that I do get out there, I as a singer-songwriter, I tour a lot in the summer and I don't have
Oh,
time
wow.
to tend a garden, but I'm sort of cutting back. And so I'm dreaming now of doing some gardening. The little bit that I have done though, I do find it very calming and therapeutic, like just getting my
Mhm.
hands in the dirt and you're just thinking of that. The
Mhm.
world is just so loud, and we have there's just it's just so noisy. And when I am gardening, it does feel like very calming, and that's why I thought, I don't know, I guess it's creative.
I think it absolutely is. But what you're tapping into is this framework that I've talked about, which is getting into the physical body. Like number one, you're getting your hands dirty, you're smelling the earth. There's the tactile quality, like the colors, of the if I'm in the flower garden, it's like, oh my gosh, the colors and the textures of the flower petals.
Hmm.
All of a sudden you start to hear the birds. It's
Yeah.
like you just come into this full sensory experience and the mind just starts to quiet, right? Like because
Yeah.
you're just brought into the present. So I think there are definitely creative choices. Some people are more creative with their gardening than others, but even putting the creativity aside, it's like, you're really keying into that system of calming the body to
Mm.
quiet the mind. And then you start to hear, the subtler voice of insight, and wisdom. So I mentioned the flower petal mandalas. This is one of my favorite art prompts. It's simply to gather flowers, whether it's left over from Mother's Day or a birthday or picked from the garden or somewhere else, and just creating a circle of the petals with different patterns in it. And it is incredibly calming for all the reasons we just talked about.
Mm.
And it just really helps people just slow down. I teach a technique called dialoguing, which is basically having a conversation back and forth with the artwork that you create. This is a way that we tap into some of the symbolism and meaning within the work. And even the flower petal mandalas, I did one. I went into the process just so stressed out, and I knew I needed to just land. So I just did for like 20 minutes this little flower petal mandala out in the grass outside of my studio. And when I dialogued with it, it reminded me that there's always a succession in how plants bloom. So it's like the tulips always come before the blah, 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 before the lilacs, before that, like that succession of spring blooms doesn't change no matter what's happening with the weather. So it was like, stop trying to force things in time. In life, things will happen in your own time. Like that's literally like what the wisdom of my piece had to say. But I had to like slow down and be with the materials to get to that.
Mm.
Whether or not people dialogue with the artwork or not, I think that the flower petal mandala is a wonderful example of how to be creative. It's the example of getting in the body to calm and quiet the mind. And you don't need to be able to paint or draw. It's again another
Yeah.
great example that you don't need to like finish things. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can let it blow away. That has like this whole other thing to just like let it go.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful practice. It really is.
Thanks for that. I like that.
Yeah, you're
I think
welcome.
about there most of the time it's not like this, but when I'm purposeful, it is. So just going to the store to shop for a meal, and I don't know really what the meal is. So I go in and I look at all of the produce and I, see, start to imagine what I could make from it. And
Mhm.
like you said, touching the things, looking at the colors and just imagining, and the whole process
Mm.
is really relaxed all the way through the cutting and preparing and cooking
Yeah,
and setting it. The whole thing is is one of those creative processes. And it's interesting. What I'm thinking about is how just everyday activities, we have the potential of making them more insightful and creative opportunities.
absolutely. What I love about your example is like how present you are through the whole process. And you're in the grocery store and it's like the vibrancy, hopefully, of all the produce, and the textures, and you bring them home. And again, there's that tactile quality, there's the scent of it, and just like being with it to create a beautiful thing, and then to share that possibly with others. I think alongside and when we talk about the hero's journey at the end, there's the sharing of the elixir. There's the sharing. So it's like as someone who cooks, like that's the sharing at the end. And I think that's just an often in our society when we talk about creativity, we often think about having some sort of product, and we talk about monetization or like how is it shared? Is it posted? Like how many likes does it have? But I think the humility of just sharing for sharing's sake to create community or to share that creative output with a loved one is just really an maybe not unspoken, but maybe not honored or revered enough part of the creative process. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's really beautiful.
Now, we've mentioned Hero's Journey several times,
Hmm.
and a lot of listeners are thinking about fresh starts in their lives,
Hmm.
changing patterns, changing
Right.
careers, up against some kind of a change that they're trying to navigate.
Hmm.
So could you back up and just sort of give us a broad view of and to kind of more define the hero's journey so that people understand what that means?
Yeah, so the hero's journey is basically starts with a call, the call being something happens. And usually it's a pretty big something, though not always. But this something happens that opens a door or reroutes you in a new direction. And once that call happens, we say we cross the threshold. You begin this journey. Oftentimes you meet with allies, you create community as you are on this journey, but then you also have more challenges, new challenges that come up. And so the hero often goes through this process of try, fail, try, fail, try, fail. And somewhere along the line, they meet a guide who helps them and gives them extra piece of information needed to take them to the next level or to the next chapter. And as this happens, often there's a test and the test is overcome. The hero is elated, and often they have this wisdom that they then share with the world. So the example I love that we're familiar with, I think, is Star Wars, where Luke Skywalker's parents were killed, and that started him on this journey towards becoming a Jedi. And he like try failed against the dark side. And I always refer to the first one, where he's like flying towards the Death Star. And there's this knowledge of how they finally have this knowledge that to defeat the dark side, they have to shoot into this thing in the middle of the Death Star. I'm not very techie with the language at all. I'm not that much
We
of
aren't
a Star
either.
Wars freak. But at a certain point, he's flying towards the center of this thing, and he's like, he hears use the Force, and he takes off like his, I call them technogoggles.
Yeah.
They have an official name, and he like trusts himself, and then he defeats the Death Star, and he goes on, and then he goes on to be a leader within the Jedi Force. So like for me in my example, it was just like I realized that I was out of alignment and that wasn't sustainable, and I needed to redefine what creativity meant for me, and I needed to learn who I was. And that came through some pretty painful realizations that like I wasn't happy inside. And I can't think offhand right now if there were any, like what some of the specific big signs were. One was the ending of my marriage for sure. Later, I mentioned a different hero's journey where the call started with a medical diagnosis. I noticed, Stacey, like that you had said your listeners are up against something. You're up against. So if you feel like life is happening and you're up against something, I mean, the pandemic could have been the call for a lot of people. You're up against something financially or career-wise. The hero's journey is like a mindset shift, I think, that helps us move from like a victim or reactionary mode into something that's more intentional, and you can lean into it like, what am I here to learn from this experience? And it just gives you a different, fresh lens that really leans more into a growth mindset.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Like a flow, more of a flow.
yeah, yeah. And I think it is so easy in this fast-paced society that we're just gonna push through the challenges and keep on keeping on as we know it. And the hero's journey gives us permission to pause and be like, well, wait, can I, is this an opportunity to change my perspective, change how I operate, and to like really start to pause, I guess, pause and think more about that next chapter, that next step, that we have the power to write our own journey versus let life live us.
You
Yeah.
know, I think there's also something you've touched on, like when you were talking about Luke and he was trying to, and he heard in him, he heard, his inner voice said, use the
Mhm.
Force. Learning to trust our inner wisdom. So the first step is like learning to trust that inner wisdom. The first step is hearing it, being quiet enough to hear it. But
Mhm.
then I think a lot of people really struggle with trusting what they're hearing inside.
Yeah.
What are some steps we can take to trust that inner voice?
That is such a good question. As I teach it in art-based mindfulness, we work with imagery. We dialogue, we do some art therapy techniques to process the meaning within the image. And I say to people, you have to act. It's one thing to gain insight as we tap into the information in the artwork. Most people are like, oh, I already on some level was aware of that, but they weren't listening, they weren't acting on it.
Mm.
And so I remind people that it's not the message of the artwork, it's actually your inner voice talking. And so, like, I think number one is the awareness that you're not listening. You're not listening to yourself,
Yeah.
you know? So, and so if you're not listening, you're not acting on what you hear. It's like if you start to just try the little things, and just notice how things shift because they do start to shift and things start to just sort of naturally fall away. I haven't found that there's ever been like this life-shattering something that happens that people weren't ready for through this practice. It's quite the opposite. It's like things just start to naturally shift and fall away. And then that makes it much easier to trust kind of the bigger things, and we keep making art around these things to like inform that insight and to develop that trust in that inner wisdom. For me, it was after doing this as a journal practice regularly for several years. And I was reading through my journals about a time where it had been the end of a relationship that was quite toxic. But at the time, because it was toxic and I was in it, I really doubted myself.
Mm.
And as I was reading, I was like, holy cow, like this wisdom that was coming through the art journaling, through the imagery, it was on point. And from that moment, it was like, I really trust this voice and I trust this process for myself. So I think it's something that's gained like anything with practice, with small steps, gaining confidence in it. And then once in a while having these aha moments where you
Mm.
look back and realize like, okay, having listened, I'm learning to trust that more.
Mm. That's beautiful.
Well, what haven't we asked you that you wish that we had?
Hmm. Well, you had a question that was like, how does creativity bridge the gap between intuition and science?
Oh, yeah.
Um, and so I wanted to pull apart intuition. I don't know if this is like, because I know we're sort of getting like to the end of time.
Please do.
No,
Um,
it's
well, I mean,
fascinating.
I think that oftentimes we think about intuition. I don't know. I think everyone that you ask, like, how do you define intuition, you might get a different answer. I tend to think of intuition as being perceived as an external source of information, like our intuitive guides or, spirit
Mm.
guides or things like that. And so I like to think of intuition as actually being intuition, this like information that we hold inside of us.
I
Mm.
like
Um,
that.
and it's always there. Like as I teach art-based mindfulness, it shows up over and over again. We all have it. So some people say they're not intuitive, right? Maybe what they're actually are is like so busy they're not listening,
Mm.
or they've
Yeah.
become disconnected from that inner voice. I believe it is always there. And so I've spoken to how creativity can be used to tap into that. I I mentioned earlier in the interview like the East meets West
Yeah.
components of art-based mindfulness. So specifically in yoga philosophy, there's an anatomy of the mind body. There's a map of the human anatomy that connects the mind and body. It's called the koshas. And so this is where this idea of calming the body to quiet the mind, like it's to tap into that inner voice. It's based on this idea of mind-body connection. And until very recently, in Western science, that was disconnected. And it's neuroscience that is showing the importance of the connection of the mind-body, specifically through the nervous system, specifically through fight or flight versus right or rest and digest. So creativity, as we talked about, it bridges that gap. We can use it to calm the nervous system and to gain insight. It's got literally the mind and body component to that.
Mm.
And so I just think that is a really beautiful part of the practice that it acknowledges these two points of view. And I think it's just wonderful that these two points of view are starting to merge. But for me, it's really exciting that art can be that bridge.
Mhm. Well, what's on your radar in terms of what's next for you? What are you excited about?
Hmm. Can you be more specific? Like we might have to circle back or edit
In your
this.
life and your work, like what are you looking forward to?
Well, I had thought that the Girl in the Woods series was finished with Timberella, that's the central character, Timberella number 6 last year. And all of a sudden there's Timberella number 7.
Mm.
And so that it's funny when I made Timberella 6, it was on the intention of enterprising. And I thought that enterprising meant like showing up in the world, with my new brand, and everyone would know my brand, and it would be like an enterprise. But what it really turned out to be using the art-based mindfulness techniques is I like created this piece just to stay out of my head, and to be like really calm and focused throughout the practice. What I realized enterprising was like to be resourceful and to be hardworking and to keep things simple. And as much as I wanted my piece to be this incredible ball gown, it looked like a snazzy work dress. And so I'm like, okay, well, I knew that's what the piece wanted to be. I wasn't going to force it. And I had a lot of fun creating that piece. And there are some really fun stories about how I knew the piece was done because I mentioned that Girl in the Woods started with the narrative of a storm. She fell
Yeah.
in a storm. It ended in this crazy blizzard with my studio like rocking and the roof creaking. And the next day I came in to my studio wondering if she was done. And she was most absolutely done. And she was like so sturdy. And I thought like she was the first piece that actually could be placed outside. And I thought to myself, she could have weathered last night's storm. And I had like shivers. I started crying because I worked 5 years on this body of work. I had started
Ah,
crying, like realizing like that she'd come full circle from this like weak thing to like being this solid being that now weathered the worst of storms. And so I thought that that completed the circle and the story was done. And then all of these things happened this winter and spring in exploring more about the hero's journey, and realizing that the last component is the sharing of the elixir. It's like, oh, I need to be more vocal about getting this work out into the world. I need to really expand my offerings for people. And thus, the seventh piece emerged, and it is going to be a big ball gown, but it's a light one. The one that I had wanted to do last year was like this heavy, burdensome thing, and it was like
ah.
wasn't fun at all. So now it just feels like this more natural unfolding. So I'm excited to complete that body of work. I'm excited about my plans to get the artwork and my podcast and the ideas about art-based mindfulness more out into the world. And I'm excited about how the process of, because I'm so process oriented, like how the process of working this piece will like be a metaphor for all the things going on in life. Because I find that how we roll in creative process is very much how we roll in life.
Yeah.
And in my work doing art-based mindfulness, we do a lot of like unlearning. I work with a lot of creative trauma in the beginning before
Hmm.
it really gets fun and people are like spreading their wings in the direction that they want to go. And I feel like that's happening for me right now, and it feels pretty great. And
Yeah.
I feel so grateful to be talking with you too. And thank you for helping me to get my message into the world and to talk about this a little bit more. So,
That's so awesome. We were just, Stacy and I are in a mastermind group, and we were just talking about this last night about the work that each one of us do. We all have our own little avenues that we are trying to use whatever gifts that we have to make the world a little better place, but
yeah.
also letting the world know about those gifts, like getting the word out. That's so hard, to like quote unquote market yourself or try to put it out there. But it's who was it that said last night? They were like, but that's good stewardship of your gifts. You have to
Mhm.
like let people know about it. You can't just
Yeah.
hide it in your, no one's going to just come knock on your door and go, hey, do you happen to know something about art-based mindfulness? You have to let
Yeah.
people know, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that's part of what we like to do here on the podcast is help people get the word out about stuff that is helpful, because we're all just like, is it Ram Dass says we're all just walking each other home, so just
Yeah.
trying to put out anything that can help somebody. And like I said, in this really loud world, I think what you're doing is just really beautiful. And I know it's going to help a lot of people.
Thank you so much. I'm just thinking about a podcast episode that I did recently. I can't remember which one, but it was about this topic. And I bring this up because this is the Fresh Start podcast.
Yeah.
And people are leaning into things that they are up against towards having a fresh start,
Mhm.
obviously. And I think for people to remain open to the idea that today's challenges are tomorrow's opportunities to share something really beautiful that you don't even know that you have within yourself yet. That's the gift and the beauty of the hero's journey. If you start to
Ah,
like really open yourself to the possibility of the challenges. And I'll email later the podcast episode that I referred to,
good. We can put it
where
in the
you'll
show
just edit
notes.
that out and
Well, no.
and we'll just end with like today's challenges are tomorrow's gifts that you may not even know that you have.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's
So,
awesome. Well, we always end, Stacy mentioned we do Enneagram work. And so she always likes to end our podcast with some Enneagram prompts. So what have you got today,
Yes.
Stacy?
I have Enneagram prompts for the hero's journey.
Oh, good.
oh, awesome.
And from the thinking center of expression for intellectual exploration, reflect on a challenge or a call to adventure you've experienced recently. And what limiting belief or old narrative might you need to re-examine in
Mm.
order to cross your own personal threshold?
Mm.
And from the feeling center, notice what emotions come up as you consider leaving what you know, your comfort zone. Where do you feel excitement, fear, or hope as you imagine embracing the new path and the new beginning? And then from action center or doing, what is one small courageous step that you can take this week to move forward on your own journey? And find a creative resource like art, journaling, or a mindfulness practice to help you listen to your inner wisdom. And that will support your next steps.
I love them.
That's awesome. I love that too.
Yeah, those are great. Those are great. Well, thank you again, Jodi Rose Gonzalez, for sharing your story, sharing your journey, sharing your gifts, and allowing people to learn a little bit about this art therapy and the art mindfulness that you do. I think it's something really needed in this world, and we appreciate your time today. We'll put all of your links to your website, to your Instagram. I think aren't there some there's I think there's some free PDFs and stuff that people can download. Some free
For art
art prompts.
prompts.
Yeah.
Mhm.
On
Yeah.
your website. So everyone should go there and they could get some free art prompts and also listen to your podcast. So um, there's a lot of stuff that they can dive into. So thanks again, Jodi Rose Gonzalez, for joining us here on the Fresh Start podcast.
Thank you.
And we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. Thanks for listening. Bye.